Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on whereabouts you are in the world. Got a few people joining, still a few people dropping in by the looks of things. Um, so really, this is the first time we're doing this type of session, um, and basically, I'm here just to answer any questions that you might have regarding SharePoint. Whether that's about where to store files, how to integrate it with Power Apps, external sharing questions. I got a lot of these types of questions all the time, so now is your time to ask. Um, it'd be good to know where people are in the world as well. You can drop that into the chat as well. But yeah, just if you've got any questions at all, drop them into the chat. What I'm going to do is I'm going to work my way through. Um, Hopefully answering all the questions as we go through. And then yeah, it might be that there's some stuff that'll spin off a little bit. There might be some stuff that I can try and find some examples of maybe and things like that. We'll just see where it kind of takes us really. So there's no fixed agenda for this. So literally whatever you want to ask, stick it into the chat and let's see where we can go. So let's have a little look at the first questions. So how to integrate Figma UI designs in SharePoint? I'm not overly. I've used a bit of kind of Figma and that sort of thing in the past before, so I'm not overly sure about the kind of the actual integration parts. I think I did hear someone say that they do have some mock-up designs and things like that of SharePoint, um, but in reality, I think when it comes to designing SharePoint, to be honest, you can just get hands on and start putting something together. I wouldn't waste too much time in designs and mock-ups and wireframes. And in fact, I've seen a lot of companies come unstuck in the past before because they've invested loads of money into designers creating designs, which turned out to not really be possible once you got it over into SharePoint. So I think some of the best sort of places to mock something up is just with a demo SharePoint site. Um, so looking forward to this, Dougie. Brilliant. Be interesting to see what other issues and questions have others too. So thanks, David. Yeah, if you've got any questions, just drop them in. It looks like there's a word limit, so I will have to break across a few joining from the UK. Sunny Congleton. Oh, not too far away. Our head office is in Chester. Congleton's not too far away from us. Joining from UK, so a lot of UK people joining. Hopefully, you guys are getting a bit of nice weather now as well. We've had some horrendous weather recently. It's been really cold over here, and today it's really, really warm. As you can see, the sun's beaming in through my window at the moment. Just here to hear about using SharePoint within companies. Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping to use these type of sessions as a bit of a community, really, to hear about how people are using SharePoint, what they're using it for, what pain points they have, and hopefully giving some value to people where they're getting stuck using SharePoint. I have a lot of classic pages. Oh no. They have multiple classic sites lists embedded in them, and that gives teams a great way to work and track different topics. Whenever I hear the word classic in SharePoint, it must admit it does make my sort of toes curl a little bit because I'm very much an advocate of using modern pages. I try to do the same in modern, but as soon as more than one list is embedded in a page, you can't edit individual items within the list. Is that intended by Microsoft? I tried to do the same in modern, but as soon as more than one list is embedded in a page, you can't edit individual items in the lists. I've not seen that before. That is strange. It doesn't sound like it should be a problem. It sounds more like it is a potential bug that you found there. Um, I would suggest if you're from, well, you could do one of two things. If you're already existing Valto customer, give us a shout. You can email support@valto.co.uk if you're an existing customer, and we can look into that for you. But it probably, if it is a bug with the system, it will result in a Microsoft ticket being created, a support ticket with Microsoft anyway. Um, um, I would love to go to yeah, go to one. To be honest, There is differences in modern and classic, and to a certain extent, I still feel like not everything that you could do in classic is in modern, but the usability of it is just way better and looks and feels way better. So, um, at some point in the not too distant future, I think Microsoft will just kind of like they've stopped you from creating classic sites and things like that. I think eventually they will essentially just say, right, you've got to get all over to modern, and it's going to be totally turned off. So I would be planning to be moving to modern. Um, any suggestions on how to audit permissions? What tools are out there with the ability for users to share at the file level? Permission sprawl is impossible to keep with. Yeah, I mean this is a big problem in terms of the permission sprawl. Um, Now, there are tools which are out there which can help with this, but um, I mean, you've got the likes of ShareGate and things like that, which could potentially help depending on what you're trying to do, but that could potentially help with this. But a lot of those tools are very expensive. Um, and I've seen people create like PowerShell scripts and things like that to try and build out something manually. There has been promises of that in SharePoint Premium. There's going to be a bit more control over who has access to things and seeing that at a bird's eye kind of view. So that potentially could be an option to investigate. Um, What's the next one there? We are using SharePoint now within our company for collaboration of documents. We are now looking to go live with our intranet in SharePoint. Brilliant, great. If you've already been using it for kind of collaborating on documents and things like that, the intranet is obviously the logical next step. What I would also recommend as well is consider how you accessing that, because if you've been using SharePoint for file sharing, collaboration, that sort of stuff. Hopefully, you've been doing that in conjunction with using Microsoft Teams as well. Um, so I've produced videos in the past before which explain the kind of difference of where you should store your documents. Should you be storing them in SharePoint, in Teams, in OneDrive? So I'm not going to go overly into that because I do have a lot of content out there, but a very short story being Microsoft Teams, where you store your documents, which you're going to collaborate on with your departments and team members on a day-to-day basis. OneDrive is like where you store your own documents that don't really need to be given to other people. And SharePoint is like your publishing platform. And in fact, they used to call what is now communication sites, they used to call publishing sites, which I think is a slightly better name because it's more about giving documents to a wider kind of organization, the wider organization. So yes, if you are launching the internet, the point of my waffle, what I'm saying about Microsoft Teams is consider where people are accessing the SharePoint internet from. Something I'm seeing a lot more now with people who are fully adopting Microsoft Teams and getting into the world of Microsoft Teams is they're also putting their SharePoint intranet into Teams. So you can have a tab on the left-hand side of Teams, like where you've got alerts and chats and Teams and the phone icon and things like that. You can also have another icon for your intranet, so you can embed your SharePoint intranet into your Teams. And that just means for companies which are taking this kind of Teams first approach, where everything goes through Teams, it's a one-stop shop of Teams, then you tend to find it makes sense of your intranet in there. Now, I had a conversation literally about a week ago with someone who said that they would rather have it completely split out, and their users are used to having it split out, and that's totally fine. But if you are trying to go down this Teams first route and having a one-stop shop of everything of Teams is kind of the day-to-day use, then look at putting SharePoint intranets into Teams, which is also known as Viva Connections. So if you look up Viva Connections, you'll kind of see what that looks like. Again, these are sort of things that Valto help people with all the time. So you can get in contact with us and we can help you through that journey as well. Can we increase the SharePoint form text field characters limit, single line and multi-line? Yes, you can do. I don't know what the maximum is off the top of my head. But yeah, you definitely can do that. And if you are using the likes of Power Apps to customize the form, you can control the amount of characters are in there as well. Um, and actually, if it's a SharePoint list, I quite often change the form using Power Apps because I think you can just make it look so much better. You can add additional functionality, adding additional customized buttons and things like that. There's all sorts of cool stuff you can be doing. Um, Hi there. I'd like to know what the best way to embed suggestions or issues reporting tool into a page so user can update me on improvements and issues. Great. Yeah. I mean, that's something we see quite a lot of. Like some people refer to them as a suggestion box on an intranet. The easiest way to do something like that would be to use a call to action web part, which again, this is on the modern pages of SharePoint. Call to action web part. You can set the background image of the call to action web part. You can also change the text on there. So you call it as a suggestion box or improvement ideas or tell us what you think of the intranet or whatever it is. And then with a button. And then what I typically see a lot of people do is then link to a Microsoft form. Now it could be a SharePoint list. Now I'm this whole session's about SharePoint. It could be a SharePoint list if you wanted to. And in fact, actually, if you wanted to make it so other people could see suggestions that have already been submitted, then a SharePoint list would probably be quite a good idea. If it was something that was more like something a bit more sensitive, or you didn't want people to see it, then Microsoft Form is probably the quickest way to create a form to get some quick, short feedback to sort of publish. Um, or the third option, a bit more long-winded, but you could maybe create a Power App and maybe even create like a Canvas Power App that you embed into SharePoint to surface some of those suggestions, some of those ideas to show it back to people. Um, I'm losing track of where I am in here now. Um, Hi, Dougie. Thanks for the Q&A. I have a bit of a long-winded question regarding conditional access policies. Here we go. And potentially excluding a specific site from it. Mind if I copy and paste it here for you? You can do. I must admit, conditional access policies and some of the kind of more EMS type of stuff is not necessarily my strong suit, but happy to have a crack at it. And if not, I can take that away and come back to you. Because we have a whole team at Valto which is just dedicated to advanced security features of Microsoft 365. So they would definitely be able to answer it if I can't. Um, Another question here. I'm relatively new to SharePoint. Okay, that's my specialist area, so don't worry about that. But want to learn how to create forms and lists. Does your team do hands-on training? So, good question. Um, We don't offer kind of like your traditional kind of training, just off the cuff. We used to, but we tend to find it's too little and um, uh, essentially wasn't really kind of like what we wanted to do. We offer training out the back of projects, but also what we do, which is different to a lot of our competitors, is we offer what we call tokens, support tokens. So support tokens are essentially where it's like one token is 1 hour of time, and you buy them in batches of hours. And I'm not a salesperson, so I can't even remember at top of my head exactly how much they cost. Um, but they're not drastically expensive, and it's a bit like pay as you go topping up. I think the minimum package is 12 hours, 12 tokens for £1,500. And essentially, what that will get you is 12 hours that you can call off at any time. So, if you're new and getting started with SharePoint, what that allows you to do is it taps into our specialist team. So, if you've got a question, you get stuck, and then you can call them off in half an hour increments, and you can just have a quick call with us. So, rather than having like a dedicated training session, which, if I'm totally honest, out there again, there's loads of people who offer training sessions, but they're very expensive, and they're all very templated. So it's not necessarily going to cover exactly what you want to cover. Whereas with our token packages, you can just be working on something, creating a form, creating a parrot, whatever you're doing. You get stuck, and you can just pick up the phone and speak to someone and just say, I'm stuck with this. What do I do?" And then you can get someone like myself onto a call with you, and we can work through the problem. So the short answer, again, I've waffled a bit here. The short answer is we don't offer dedicated training programs because they're very expensive and they're not really the best value for money. But we do offer pay as you go support, is basically better. SharePoint sites under Teams. The Files tab is a window into the SharePoint library. Oh, okay, I think that's just more of a statement. Yeah, so SharePoint sits under team. So every Microsoft team, there is a SharePoint site, a team SharePoint site, which sits in the back of it. And it can get very confusing because you end up using the word team a lot when you talk about this. But technically, yeah, if you're storing files inside of Microsoft Teams, you're already using SharePoint. You probably just didn't realize it. Um, I'm also interested in training specifically on Power App Forms as an Intex Forms is being disabled in my tenant. Yeah, I mean, again, as I say, we don't offer necessarily dedicated training as a service. If you had a large project with us, we do then do custom kind of training packages at the end of it. But we don't just sell just purely training, but we do offer um, that are support tokens, which, as I say, you can use it for anything. I'm talking about SharePoint, but you could use it about Power Apps. You could use it for anything Microsoft 365. So, like conditional access policies we were just talking about. If you were stuck and you had a question about that, you can just contact us and essentially you'd be able to get in touch, um, and we would have an expert on hand. So, if you're interested in buying some tokens, if you email us at hello, I'll put it into the chat actually. Hello@valto.co.uk. Just say you've attended our session on YouTube. You're interested in getting some support tokens to get some help, and I can guarantee you we can give you a block of hours Pro definitely cheaper than what you could have a standard training course, and it will be used specifically for what you're looking at, and you've got an expert that can be parachuted in at any time to help you, and those hours will sit there, and they don't expire or anything like that, so it might be that you need a load of help right now, and you don't need any more help for another 6 months, and that time will sit there, so again, have a little think about that. Bu 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 bum. So look at these questions. Our thing with our intranet is our company is big on the look of the intranet and making it look like a website. I've heard that before. SharePoint generally is basic on what it can do with making it look like a website, but we are looking to implement a web app called ShortPoint, which will give us the functionality to make it look the way we want. So, right, this is a topic that I'm very, very passionate about in terms of what SharePoint looks like. Because the short story is, um, I don't think you need a lot of kind of third party products and things like that to get a SharePoint site to look the way you want. Now, when people say to look like the website, I would say you can get it to look like the website, or you can get it to look like your brand, essentially. And that is through proper use of color palette, making sure you're using proper colors, through imagery, videos, tone of voice, things like that. And you can achieve all of this with out of the box SharePoint. So I would almost look at creating something out of the box with modern SharePoint, not classic SharePoint, modern SharePoint, and get that to a position which looks really good. As I say, I've got loads of videos out there. You can just go onto YouTube and search for SharePoint designs and things like that. And I've got loads of tutorials which show you those types of things. Or again, I say we specialize in that. So again, you can reach out to us and we can help you build something. And we're very passionate about using SharePoint out of the box, as in natively without any third-party products. The reason being is because third-party products usually are quite costly, and it ties you into something for a long period of time. Um, and the other thing is, as well, is maybe not necessarily third-party products, but if you were to develop something overly bespoke or things like that, you've got the possibility that something could break, or Microsoft update something and it breaks and that sort of stuff. So I've always been very much an advocate of use SharePoint out of the box because it can go pretty far, to be honest. And I think most people only realize like 30% of how far you can go with SharePoint. So they get to that 30% point and then think, oh, this is rubbish. I'm going to go and look for a third party product now to make this perfect. Um, but that isn't necessarily the case. If you can get it to like 90 or 100% of what it can actually do and what it can actually look like using out of the box SharePoint, I think you'd be very happy with that. And I've convinced many um, internal kind of marketing comms teams, things like that, who are looking at building intranets, that actually you can do it without the box SharePoint. Um, I found the SharePoint version of Microsoft Team Theatre to watch below. Brilliant. All right, I'll give it a short version. Okay, I need to check how many tokens I have left. Yeah. Well, again, if you're already a pre-existing customer of Alto, you can always email us, and we can tell you your token balance, and let us know how we could be helping more of these type of questions. We can use the tokens to work on these types of things with you. Um, Essentially, we have a CA, so conditional access policy, to stop users from downloading, syncing, etc., on unmanaged devices, and want to exclude a specific SharePoint site from the policy. Um, I mean, that to me doesn't sound like it wouldn't be achievable, but as I say, it's not necessarily something um, which I know off the top of my head, unfortunately, because as I say, conditional access policies, they're not really SharePoint. They're almost like a security set of knowledge skills that you need to have. But to me, it doesn't sound impossible. But yeah, if you're an existing Valto customer, just email our support desk, support@valto.co.uk, and they'll answer the question for you or even help you set it up. If you're not an existing Valto customer, as I say, get some tokens and we can help you do that. Just email hello@valto.co.uk and we can get you set up and get you going with that. Um, we're setting up SharePoint intranet pages, which is going down really well with our team and has led to lots of ambition. Any advice on integrating multiple calendars, ideally from Outlook? Oh, good question. Now, um, calendars, you can have a calendar for a team site, but it's related to that team. You can you can use classic calendars of SharePoint and you can sync them with Outlook. So it's not like you're opening up an Outlook calendar into SharePoint. You get a SharePoint calendar that you can open from Outlook. So if you've already got an existing Outlook calendar, it isn't necessarily something you can bring in. But I've seen some really horrendous things. The reason why it kind of lit me up is I've seen some really horrendous things where people have done things like iframing calendars. So like every calendar, say for example, if you were adamant that you really wanted the calendar from Outlook or a shared mailbox or something like that, I've seen people in the past before get the web version of that and then embed it into SharePoint by the embed web part. However, again, coming back to this design passion flair of mine, it doesn't look good because with an iframe you get the full kind of window, so you get the top box, you get the top area, you get the scroll bar, you get everything. So although you get your calendar in SharePoint and you've ticked the box of you have achieved that, it just doesn't look great. Um, um, Thanks, really informative and good to know. You're welcome, David. Communication sites are great for making nice looking pages. I really like them. Yeah, exactly. I mean, Microsoft are actually launching quite a lot of templates for communication sites as well, so you can see like examples of different types of sites that SharePoint use that you can use in SharePoint. So onboarding sites, HR kind of sites, things like that. So go and check them out. Something else as well, which I advocate people go and look at, is called the SharePoint Lookbook, which is free templates. Like with anything that's Microsoft, there's a free template. It literally just like surface level is what it shows you. It's not rigged up to do anything particularly. It's just to show you what you could basically build. But I think it's really good food for thought. So if you just go to Google, type in SharePoint Lookbook, a bit of a mouthful, you'll find that it's official Microsoft website, and there's loads of really cool designs and stuff on there, and it gives you some good ideas. And in fact, I've created some YouTube videos in the past before, which goes into that and shows some examples how you can deploy them and that sort of stuff. What's the link to sign in and see how many tokens you have? Could you post that as well? I bought tokens a while ago and can't find the link. I don't I don't have the link to hand, unfortunately. But yeah, if you wanted to get that, we do offer as well like monthly reports where you can issue out by PDF. Um, I don't actually work in the support team anymore. It's long been days since I've been in the support team, but I know that if you email them, so support@valto.co.uk, they can tell you that, and they can also get you set up with a PDF, essentially, which gets sent out every month, which shows your full usage of what you use them for, what your balance is, things like that. So it gives you a bit of a breakdown as well. Um, we're finding the biggest obstacle to SharePoint adoption is the inability to easily add documents from multiple sites into an Outlook email. Aside from OneDrive Sync, are there any other solutions? So one of the things is I'd question whether documents should be going into Outlook in the first place, or whether they should be going to Teams. Um, Unless I suppose it's for external people. But to a certain extent, I'm trying to understand the issue. So we're finding the biggest obstacles on SharePoint documents is the inability to easily add documents from multiple sites into an Outlook email. So if you're really sort of hell bent that it has to be an email rather than Teams, the way I would do it is actually sync the relevant folders that you're working on, making the assumption that it's not always wildly different SharePoint sites every single time you're doing it. I would sync the SharePoint sites, ideally the folders specifically that you need, and then you can even then drag and drop them into emails and things like that. So that makes it a little bit quicker. Um, I think this is somebody responding to somebody else here. Out of the box templates that SharePoint now has are really nice. New ones come out every now and then. Yeah, exactly, Travis. I would keep on an eye out for them. They're really good, and if anything, it'll just give you food for thought. Like it might not be like, oh, okay, I really want this onboarding site template, but take it with a pinch of salt. It's more I look at them from a um, perspective of, well, how are they laid out? What web parts are they using? And next time that I'm building an intranet or I'm looking at something, I can then go, oh, I remembered that design, that layout. They use three columns and they use these web parts in those three columns, and that looked really nice. Because one of the challenges of getting SharePoint to look nice from a design perspective um, is knowing the layout in terms of knowing how things space. Because annoyingly, and this has always been the case with SharePoint, is that every web part seems to have a slightly different kind of way that it aligns, and the content in it is not always in the same place and things like that. So over time, you have to build up a bit of a pattern of knowing which web parts sit nicely with others. So on a lot of designs, and you probably see if you've watched any of my videos, you'll see a lot of designs that I come up with. I often use like the news web part as a slideshow um, on the left-hand side of a SharePoint site at the very, very top. And the right-hand side, I use a vertical section. And then there's a few things which pair really nicely with that layout. So like a quick links web part with the large kind of icons, they fit quite nicely there. Um, like the countdown timer works quite well there, like as a bit of a call to action type of thing. So there's a few things like that, but I just know them off the top of my head now that I know that they fit quite nicely. So if you go and look at those designs and you memorize almost like what works and what doesn't, forget what the context of the design is, but that will give you good kind of like stead going forward of next time you create a SharePoint site, you've remembered what layouts work and what web parts work well together, because certain web parts will look nicer and fit better with others, and some don't play very nicely with each other. Um, yeah, like I said, super long-winded. Went down a route with sensitivity labels, but the conditional access deposit overrides it. Thanks for your time, regards. Probably lurking and absorb lurking and absorbing some knowledge. Great. Have you got any examples of unexpected SharePoint use that has made you think, "Hey, that's really cool"? Um, Yeah, yeah, I have, quite a lot. Um, the reason why, my brain's, like, flicking through, like, a catalog of things is trying to remember the stuff which is under NDA and and stuff which isn't. You'd be surprised how much work that we get that we can't even talk about. So I've got to be careful the way I say a few of these examples. So one of them was for a, government sector, can't say which one. But uh, they had a process which involved an application process, and it involved large amounts of files as part of this process. And the way that they were doing it is they were getting people to put those files onto CD-ROMs and post them is what they were doing. And you can imagine all sorts of problems which go on with that. People complaining because their parcel wasn't received in time, so they missed the application window, all this stuff, and blah, blah. So, a really cool solution we came up with that was using SharePoint was an external facing SharePoint area where they could be invited part of a different process. They could be invited to that SharePoint site. They could upload the files into that site. In fact, actually, we automated quite a lot of that process in terms of we use Power Automate workflow, which sent out an email to people, which externally shared it for a short period of time to say you have access to this for a short period of time, and then we're going to revoke your access to it. People get when documents get uploaded, notifications get sent to people internally inside this government sector, and that saved them loads of time, loads of headache. Um, and to a certain extent, it gets rid of the kind of the need for kind of CD-ROMs and all that sort of stuff. So it's probably way more sustainable to do that than it is to have loads of disks flying around and that sort of stuff. So that was one that I thought was really cool. Really enjoyed working on that one, and the context of it, as I can't really share, but that was really cool. Um, Other things I've used for so another one we worked with and we can talk about this one. We can talk about this one because we've got a case study with them. So we worked with Chester Zoo, and we basically rebuilt their intranet. They were using a very old classic version of SharePoint, which was not easy to update and that sort of stuff. And we rebuilt it with SharePoint Online. And one of the cool things which stood out to me about this that I really liked was um, we built a Power BI report, and the Power BI report did loads of things in the background. But what we surfaced on the homepage of the intranet, again in that kind of magic corner space, the top right hand corner of SharePoint, in that kind of vertical section, we created almost like a portrait size Power BI report, almost like a mobile phone size thing. And that showed the amount of visitors which had come to Chester Zoo on that day. So it's not like groundbreaking information, but it's pretty cool. Like that, we were sort of taking in information, almost like an IoT type thing, to say how many people had come into Chester Zoo that day, and then that reported back and that showed on the internet how many people were coming in and out of the zoo and that sort of stuff. So I thought that was pretty cool as well. But yeah, there's all sorts of stuff. And probably as I keep talking, I'll probably think of more stuff that I've seen SharePoint being used for. Um, bu- 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 bum. Um, don't get me wrong, we thought the way we built it on out of the box was fine. Our bosses were then trying to push us towards WordPress and preferred that look. So it depends. I guess it depends who the bosses are, essentially, in terms of their technical knowledge and things like that. But WordPress is not an intranet tool. I mean, it's great for external facing websites and things like that. I use WordPress quite a lot for building websites and that sort of thing. Um, our Valto website is built with WordPress, for example, but it's not an intranet tool. And if you've got Microsoft 365, SharePoint is the internet tool. That's why you should really build it. It's way easy to administer. The data is all secure, and you don't have the same kind of like maintenance that's required. I couldn't even imagine how much maintenance would have to go into supporting WordPress compared to SharePoint. Um, we have a team of people specifically just for maintaining WordPress. Um, Hi there. Trying to create a countdown calendar slash timer, which is set to working days only. Does this exist? Um, yeah, I think so. So there is a web part. So in SharePoint, on the modern SharePoint web pages, there is a web part, which is I think it's called countdown timer, and you can embed that in a couple of different places. You can embed it as a web part on any particular page, but also from memory, you can also add it as a section. So where you can have like sections in a SharePoint page, you can add a full width section and it can be a countdown. And this is on one of the kind of designs. I don't know which design it was. There was some design, I think, on the SharePoint lookbook, which was something to do with like event management or something like that, or like a conference management or something. Anyway, the point was, the whole purpose was to build up like some hype and awareness and things like that of the event that was coming up, and they use that full width section with the countdown timer to show that sort of countdown that's coming. I can't remember off the top of my head if you can make that just into days or business days, whatever you said. I've lost the question now. But that's where I'd start off with and have a little look and have a little play around with that before you go off looking for kind of third party products and that sort of thing. Um, Another question here. Trying to pull Azure AD group membership into list. How do I do that? Well, the first thing is why. Why are you trying to do that? Because technically, the Azure AD group is a list of people. So, is it for visibility? Is it that you're trying to show it to people? Because that sounds a bit strange to me. Because the reason why it sounds strange to me is because there's almost like a few set of kind of values and best practices I always try and follow, which is throughout SharePoint, Power Apps, Power Platform, everything. And one of those things is trying to avoid duplicating data. Um, and if you've got it in a if you've got it in an Azure AD group and you want to put it into SharePoint, that's a duplication, and that's almost like a red flag that goes over my head of like avoid duplicating data. It just sounds bad. Sounds like a bad idea. Um, Whatever you're doing, you could probably call and get it from that. Um, to find out who is in the group. Okay. Um, okay. Cool. Well, if again, I don't like duplicating data, so there might be a better way of doing this. But let's just play devil's advocate and say, how do you get um, that into a SharePoint list? The answer would be Power Automate. Now, I could probably create a Power Automate workflow in an hour that could do that quite easily. Um, Basically, what you'd want it to do is either the trigger point. It depends how often it changes, right? Because you probably want you probably want two workflows which would do this: one to add people and one to remove them. Because again, you're duplicating things. You've got to keep it up to date. But a very short, high level, you could have a Power Automate workflow. The trigger for that could be when a new user is added into an Office 365 group, I think is what it's called. And then you just go and say, the next thing is action, create a record in a SharePoint list, and then you pass through the user's name, email address, whatever it is that you need to pass them through. It might be limited what information you got on them, so you could always use like a um, get profile type of action. So that will pass through more information about them, and that's using the whatever it's called, 365 people connector, and that could pass through more information and then add them into the list. But as I say, if you're doing that, you probably want also like a workflow which is doing it in reverse. I can't remember off the top of my head if there is a trigger that's called something like removed from 365 group, but that's probably something that you want to look at doing. Um, Hi there. Trying to create a countdown. I've already answered that question. Out of the box timer doesn't do working days only though. Well, that's a shame. That's a shame. Um, Other than that, I don't know off the top of my head. I mean, there might be third-party products out there, or it might be something that you could find or build with like JavaScript. Again, we start treading on toes of you could build something using the SPFX framework. If you know JavaScript and you can build web parts, you could probably build something like that. That isn't, again, I'm not a pro code person. I like to think of myself as I could take someone else's code and make it work, but I couldn't write something off the top of my head. But yeah, that sounds like something that you're gonna have to either go and find a product which does it, or build something customized for it. We actually did something similar once, but we didn't build it. This might even predated kind of SPFX. But anyway, long story short, we built a Canvas Power App, which did something very similar. We were working with an F1 company. This is a cool thing that we did. We're working with one of the F1 teams, and they had a SharePoint site, and they wanted to have countdown on the SharePoint site for very specific races which were happening. And we built a Canvas Power App which basically looked at SharePoint list. It had all the information in there. I think, in fact, actually, we even went one step further and we used a Power Automate workflow which called an API from some F1 thingy, which then pulled out all the races and the exact times and that sort of stuff into a SharePoint list. And then we used a Canvas Power App to look at that list and then display it back with the countdown timers based on the different races and stuff like that. So you had this kind of, I think it was like the next three races, and then as a race ended, it would drop off, and then sort of the next one would appear and that sort of stuff. And we built that all using Canvas Power Apps, a Power Automate workflow, and a SharePoint list, and it looked really cool. Um, Try to get user friendly, yeah, just display member. So when site owner, okay, I don't want to add or remove, just display membership. I'm not saying add or remove people automatically, but what I'm saying is probably the membership of your AD group is going to change. It's not very rarely do they stay the same forever and nobody ever gets removed. People leave the business, people change jobs, things like that happen, and people remove out of the group. So that's why I was saying you probably want a second workflow, which is updating that list in SharePoint. How can you embed live data from an Excel chart into a SharePoint page for visitors to see without having to dive into working documents? Cool. Good question. And prepare for a long-winded answer. Um, there's two answers actually. I would say one, if you just want it reasonably basic, if you want it reasonably simplistic, there's a web part in SharePoint which is called the quick chart. I think off the top of my head it's called, and essentially you can either input the data into that quick chart manually yourself via the kind of properties of the web part, or you can say get data from Excel. So you can give it a list, a spreadsheet, and it can sort of pull that in. The second option is it is, in fact, actually, I might have been talking complete baloney there. It might be that you can pull data from a SharePoint list. Can't remember off the top of my head. We did something recently, and I can't remember whether it was a SharePoint list or an Excel spreadsheet. Either way, you could either transition to using a SharePoint list, or you could have a Power Automate workflow which just copies the Excel document into SharePoint and then use the quick chart web part to look at the SharePoint list. I must admit, I can't remember exactly off the top of my head which one you can pull from. Um, so that's option A, but a lot of people that use the quick chart web part say that it's very simplistic. And the other thing that really grinds my gears about it is that you can't change the colors of it. So say for example, if you've got your brand colors are like red or something like that, the colors of the quick chart web part by default are like blue and orange or something like that, and you can't change them. And that is a bit of a pain. So if it doesn't quite fit with your branding, again, there's other options. Another option would be Power BI is probably your best option. Now, this is probably when you start dabbling into areas where if you're not familiar with Power BI, you might need to get some help. And again, Valto, we've got a full team of people, data specialists, which build out Power BI reports all the time. We can help you with that. But yeah, Power BI would be another way, and that's what I described earlier that we did for Chester Zoo. We created a Power BI report, and we provide a really simplistic data like who's coming in and out, well, not who, but how many people are coming into the zoo, as a sort of quick little bit of information that we put onto the SharePoint site. Um, cool. And another way as well, and this isn't as good as Power BI, but if you so a lot of people I speak to who are into SharePoint are also into Canvas Power Apps. You can create graphs in Canvas Power Apps. So it's probably not the best option in terms of like Power BI being the best option, but you could also create a Canvas Power App to look at the data, and then display that as like a little graph as well. And then you can embed Canvas Power Apps into SharePoint. So in some of my previous videos, I've talked about like um, Valto. We've got a bunch of pre-built Power Apps for things like expense requests, desk booking, leave request booking, things like that. But you can embed Canvas apps directly into SharePoint. So rather than having to bounce a user out of SharePoint into that business application, you can embed it directly into your SharePoint site. So that's like a third option. So you've got quick charts, you've got Power BI, and you've got Canvas Power Apps. So I told you that was going to be a long-winded answer, didn't I? How do you feel about using PMP open source code from GitHub? There's a lot of things out there for SharePoint, but our security team doesn't like the idea. So, as I say, I'm not like overly code, PowerShell, JavaScript, that sort of stuff. So it's not really my strong suit to talk about those types of things. What I do know about the kind of PMP open source stuff, though, there is a very trusted GitHub library, and actually, if you look up who the authors are, they're all like Microsoft staff. So it's not like something to be overly worried and concerned about. But I would always edge on the side of caution. Again, I hold my hands up. I'm not the best with PowerShell or Pro Code or anything like that. So I'm always very hesitant about what I go and use. And I would only want to run something if I understood what it was, or at least get someone on my team who knows way more about that sort of stuff than I do to cross check it and say, this is what it is, this is what it does. And in fact, in the past before, Valto have kind of offered that service again through the tokens I was talking about earlier. Support. We've looked at things like GitHub things and said this is what we think it does. Again, we can't provide a kind of warranty on it because it's not our code, it's not what we've built, but we can tell you what we think it does and how reliable we think it is. So we've offered that kind of service to people in the past before. So again, if you have any questions like that, if you're an existing Valto customer, get in touch. Emails at support@valto.co.uk and ask the question. We can help you with that. If you're not an existing Valto customer, email hello@valto.co.uk and we can talk about getting you some tokens. Answer that, yeah, it's from a list. So quick charts, obviously from a list. I think what I'm getting confused is I'm fairly certain we did a project not that long ago where we use Power Automate to bring in data into the SharePoint list, and then we use quick charts to display that. So it's not overly complicated to do something like that. So that's one way of doing it. So if you were like kind of a bit of a lone wolf building things on your own, and you don't have a support team to sort of back you up with that, then that's a potential option you could do as a kind of easy option. But as I say, the visuals of a quick chart web part aren't great, if I'm totally honest. I use it now and again. And a little example that I have on one of our sample SharePoint sites that I demo at times is things like internal campaigns that people are doing and then displaying them using quick charts. So there was a customer that I was talking to a while ago. They were running like an internal phishing campaign where they wanted to basically send out some dodgy emails to their employees and see who was silly enough to click on them. And then they were reporting back that data. And then after they did that, after a 3-month period, I've missed a step in the story here. They were sending out an email every single month and then correlating that to training that they were providing. So they sent out one email at first with no training, no warning to anyone, and loads of people were doing it. Then they started doing training sessions and giving out warnings and things like that and blah, blah, to people to what to look out for. And then they reported all that back. And a very simple quick chart web part on their SharePoint homepage showed the kind of correlation of the training that they were providing and the amount of incidents of people clicking the phishing email were going down. So it's a great way of getting in front of the senior people. This internal campaign that we're doing is having effect. It's working. And this is why we're spending our time doing it. So that was a really good use of the quick chart web part. So, question: if we're using Canvas Power Apps to display on SharePoint, would all users need licenses, including access to those apps, or are they embedded or could view? Really good question. Really good question. So, if you're embedding Canvas Power Apps into SharePoint, the users that are viewing it must be licensed. Now, Canvas Power Apps are included in most of the license. So if someone's got a license to get into SharePoint, I could probably, if someone had a gun to my head, I would put a bet on to say that they probably are licensed for Canvas Power Apps as well. It's model-driven apps and Power Apps pages that you need the premium licenses for. So you tend to find if you've got access to SharePoint, you've probably got a license which gets you access to Canvas apps as well. So that's the first part of the answer. The second part is, do you need to share the app with them? Yes. Yes, you do. And I've seen it quite a lot of times before where people haven't checked it properly and they've gone live with an intranet that they've not checked that everyone has access to everything that the intranet is pointing at and looking at and embedding. And then the first thing that happens on the first day is the user looks and goes, what is going on with these white boxes on his intranet, and or sometimes they get a message say, sorry, you don't have access to this. And there's nothing worse because, like everyone knows, first impressions count, and if you mess that up, you're going to put people off using your intranet. So yes, make sure you share your Canvas Power Apps with anybody that is going to be accessing it as an embed from SharePoint. Think of embedding, even embedding Power Apps. So there is a Power Apps web part that you can do this through, but it is just an embed. It's just like an iframe essentially. And if you think of an iframe as being like it's just the user accessing exactly the same link, just in a smaller box on your internet homepage, then if they couldn't access the app via a link that you sent to them, they won't be able to see it through the interface as well. And that works for the same for anything. I've seen people trying embedding um, things like external HR portals and things like that and whatever into SharePoint Intranet, and then wonder why, oh, why can't we see it? They can access SharePoint. It's because they don't have access to the HR portal outside of SharePoint. So if they don't have access to it outside of SharePoint, why would they have access to it in SharePoint? I don't know. It baffles me, but you do see that question asked quite a lot. Um, cool. We're coming up to time now, so we've only got 9 minutes left, 8 minutes left, something like that. So if you've got any final questions, get them into the chat. We've had a lot of technical questions, but if you've got any other questions about Valto or me or advancing your career in SharePoint or anything else, do stick it into the chat. I guess one thing is, would you like another one of these sessions? This is our very first session that we've run. Would you like another session like this? Is there any other topics? I mean, I'm doing this because I basically I'm the guinea pig essentially that I'm doing this about SharePoint. But if you would like another session on kind of SharePoint, I'm happy to do that. If you would like sessions about, I don't know, people talked about conditional access policies throughout this session. Again, it's not my area of expertise, but I do know a man who knows a lot about that sort of stuff. So we could do an Ask Me and Anything about Microsoft security type of session, if that would be of use to people. So they can ask questions about conditional access policies, sensitivity labels, things like that. I know a guy, Rob, who heads up our modern work business unit. He'd probably do a session like this. Power Platform, if you've got any specific Power App type of questions, again, although I am technically a Power Platform solution architect, there's still areas of that potentially I could bring in a specialist to talk about if there's any particular areas. So yeah, so getting some comments here. So yeah, love this session. Great. I'm really, really glad you enjoyed it. How do you recommend expanding your knowledge? That's a reasonably vague question. Expanding knowledge, learning. I'm guessing learning knowledge about SharePoint. So one thing which is a bit frustrating about learning SharePoint is the fact that most other things in Microsoft 365 have got a lot of kind of like learning pathways, which is Microsoft have a website called Learning Pathways. In fact, before I kind of like shoot myself in the foot, I'm just going to Google and see if they've updated SharePoint Learning Pathways recently. So if you Google SharePoint Learning Pathways, you'll find there's some like training materials and that sort of stuff. I find they're not that great in comparison to things like Power Apps Learning Pathways and other security related stuff that we've talked about. SharePoint is a bit rogue in that sense. And I think that's because there's a lot of another question I get asked about is what exams are there for SharePoint? And the simple answer is there isn't really SharePoint specific exams. Like with Power Platform, Power Apps, there's like 9 exams related to Power Apps. So I've passed the solution architect, I've passed the consultancy, you've got the fundamentals and all that sort of entry level stuff. But there's like 9 of them. Whereas it comes to SharePoint, they used to have SharePoint specific exams, but they don't anymore. I think they're called like collaboration exams or something like that, and it covers SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, things like that. But I think there's only two of them in comparison, so there's not as much learning materials. So again, waffly answer, but I would say the best ways you can learn SharePoint is what you're doing right now. YouTube. Go onto YouTube, type in SharePoint, follow the Valto channel. Also follow my channel. So if you go to just type in Dougie Wood, you'll find that I've got a channel, and all I talk about is SharePoint, because basically that's my passion. That's what I talk about all the time. So I have a YouTube channel about that, and you'll learn loads of stuff on there. So go and check that out as well. Subscribe to the Valto channel because again we've got loads of materials that come about SharePoint, but also on the Valto channel we're secretly working away at the moment on loads of Copilot related content. We're also doing Power Apps, Power Apps, but Power Pages content as well. So that a lot of that's coming down the line. So there's loads of cool stuff like that coming down the line. What is the best way to learn about the art of the possible? Really good question. And actually, I know that this is a gap in the market, the art of the possible with SharePoint. So my personal YouTube channel talks about it a lot. Like, what can you do? So if you Google, if you go onto YouTube and search SharePoint examples or SharePoint intranet designs or SharePoint intranet examples, SharePoint designs, that sort of stuff. I create a lot of videos about that sort of stuff because I like to give people the art of the possible. What can you do with it? Examples, cool things that we've seen. On this Valto YouTube channel, we've got a very popular video which is called the top 10 SharePoint examples. So go and check that out because, again, loads of examples, art of the possibles, what you can do with SharePoint, that sort of stuff is in there. So go and check that out. Brad just saying, yeah, he's really enjoyed this session. So we would like to see more. Travis, watched most of your other YouTube videos and learned a lot. Thanks for doing them. You're welcome, Travis. Great question. Yes, SharePoint. So yeah, so obviously there's quite a bit of demand. You guys are liking these kind of sessions, so we're booking another kind of ask me anything kind of session further down the line, and I think I will try and get more people from Valto to come to them, so we can try and have other areas of conversation, maybe that surround SharePoint, so security of that, conditional access policies, things like that, Power Platform, and that sort of stuff. Like how we edit forms, that sort of stuff. We can get specialist people to come and talk about specialist things. Um, have you thought about doing plural site trainings? There's not much SharePoint info there either. You'd be great based on your YouTube. Oh, thank you. I've not actually come across plural site before. I know. So I, I'm a Microsoft MVP. So anyone doesn't know what that is, essentially, it's somebody from Microsoft who gets basically I get recognized by Microsoft for giving back to the community. But I also know a lot of other people who've got MVP awards and that sort of thing, and they offered sort of training on a couple of different kind of sort of platforms and that sort of thing. Not SharePoint specifically, more security related stuff. But I've not actually come across plural site before, so I'll have to go and have a look at that, see what that's about. So we've got one more minute by the looks of things on the live. So any other final questions? Drop them in. Again, if you've got any ideas, what I would like to hear is if you've got any other ideas about these type of Ask Me Anything sessions. If there's any other type of specialists you'd like me to pull in into these sessions that you can ask questions to, again, let me know in the chat. Hi, apologies if this has already been asked and answered, but wondering if how one could use SharePoint as a digital assets management solution. I'm talking tons of photos and videos worth pursuing. Okay, so it depends what you define as tons, to be fair, because I've attempted these types of projects in the past before, and we've looked at them, and it really does depend on what you're doing and how you're using them, how you're processing them. Is it just a big dumping ground that you're putting stuff in, or what is it? But SharePoint, again, it's one of these things when people say to me, "Oh, I've got tons and tons of videos and photos and stuff." A bit of a red flag goes up in my head, and if I'm totally honest, I'd say SharePoint isn't really your best bet for that. Um, I do I do have image libraries in SharePoint. So, like for some of the stock imagery that we use on the Valto website, we've got stock image libraries on SharePoint that we use them for. But when I've come across like media companies that have, do you know what I mean, terabytes and terabytes and terabytes of data, um, it's not the best platform for serving that up. So it really does depend on what you're using it for. There are things like Azure storage, the blob storage, and things like that, which is good for that. And I think there might even be in Azure a specific kind of media storage area that might be worth investigating as well. Um, but yeah, as I say, SharePoint is probably not your best friend for that type of thing. But it really does depend on what you define as tons and what you've got in there. So thank you very much for joining today's session. Really do appreciate you guys turning out. As I say, we do offer services to help build out SharePoint intranets, to help people answer questions, build things out. We offer full kind of end-to-end SharePoint projects as a delivery, but we also offer support tokens where we can help you on a kind of ad hoc basis as well. So if that sounds good, let me know. Again, I'm just going to put into the chat if you want to set up a call where we can discuss about how we can help you. If you email hello@valto.co.uk, we can book that in. We can get you speaking to some of our specialists, and we can see how we can help you. So thanks very much for joining. As I keep your eyes peeled for more content from Valto. Thank you.